Information Center with regards to the town's Cottage Street study. My name is Gene Chartier. I will be delivering tonight's presentation, and I'm joined by other members of our team this evening. Just before we get started, I know some folks may not be as familiar with Zoom as they may be with other online platforms. So we've provided a few points for you to consider. First and foremost is that this evening's meeting is being recorded, and our intention is to post it on the town's website to provide an ongoing record of the work on the project and to allow individuals who may not be able to be with us this evening to be able to check in on the recording and see what they missed this evening and allow them to provide comments or other information that might be of interest to them to share with the study team. As mentioned, we are on the Zoom platform, so there are a few things that to sort of keep in mind as you go forward. Our expectation is that we won't be taking questions through the presentation, but we will be taking them at the end. And if you do have a question, ask you to use the emoji or whatever the method is to raise your hand. In Zoom, the reactions mode or the button to get our attention when we're done. And we'll answer each question as they come in to allow to do that. When we do get to that point, the folks at the town will be opening up the communication channel through Zoom to allow you to ask your question and to share your thoughts with us at that point in time. So just ensure that your audio and video are connected at that point. And then if you aren't speaking, we'd ask you to mute yourself. That shouldn't be a concern because we're using the webinar mode this evening. So folks can't, by mistake, chime in or speak over top of the presentation. But when you are speaking, if there is an opportunity for conversation, we would ask you to mute yourself when you aren't speaking, just for the benefit of the other participants. So I think that's it in terms of sort of the organizational things or the things you need to know about the operation of the online meeting. I don't know, Sarah, are there any other aspects that we need to cover off before we get into the presentation?
No, I think that is great. I will do my best to move people over in a timely manner going through the list. We have quite a list of people, so please bear with me.
Yes, great. We do have a number of participants this evening, which is great to see. We're excited that people are so interested in this study. And so far, we have had a couple of in-person sessions up in the town last week, which were also very well attended. So we anticipate this evening's session will also be a good opportunity to share information about the study that we're working on. So tonight's Public Information Center will be talking about Cottage Streets and an initiative that the town is undertaking to look at some alternative design standards for the development of or the reconstruction of cottage streets. But before we get into this evening's presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Shell Grace to share a land acknowledgement and to provide some introductory comments about the origin and the purpose of the study. So I'll turn it over to you, Councillor, and happy to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Gene and Sarah. First, our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which consists of the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation. We understand this land holds immense significance to the people of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We appreciate those who live and work alongside us today and who continue the traditions of their ancestors as stewards of the land we are privileged to inhabit. We thank them for the contributions they have made in both caring for the land and in shaping this community. We commit to truth and reconciliation, to acknowledging the truth about what happened to Indigenous peoples because of colonization, and to reconciliation, which begins with each and every one of us. As a local government and public organization, we are dedicated to learning about Indigenous culture, to fostering a better relationship with First Nations and their people, and we commit ourselves to actions that move us forward on a path to healing along with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. I wanted to give a few preparatory comments tonight because this study was something that I started thinking about several years ago. As long as I've been on council, which is 2014, and before that, I've considered our cottage areas to be among the most important heritage areas in our municipality. The streets and lanes of these neighborhoods tend to be narrower, lined with vegetation, without sidewalks and curbs, and often with cottages that are decades old. Most residents, even those who don't live there, treasure their ambiance, as well as the fact that most of the time, pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists seem to be able to coexist peacefully. In 2021, after seeing several examples of Southampton Cottage Street renovations causing significant concern on the part of affected residents, I approached our CAO, Caravan Mile, to ask if we could consider a study which would look holistically at our cottage area streets. Knowing that some of these streets' infrastructure will need sustainable future repairs and upgrades, and that our transportation master plan already includes recommendations about cottage street profiles, I wanted us to hear from the folks who live there about what's working and what needs improvement. What attributes of these areas do you treasure? What issues cause you concern? Parking, speeding, intersections? This is the intent of this survey, study, and these meetings, for our staff and consultants to hear from you and to come up with several profiles which can be used for various circumstances, depending on the characteristics of each street or lane. Some streets and lanes are overdue for upgrades, but according to our 10-year capital forecast, some of these projects are years in the offing. For instance, First Street in Southampton, where my cottage is, isn't due for work until 2029. When it comes time for your street or lane to have upgrades, whether it's in 2024, 5 years, or even 10 years from now, our process will provide an additional opportunity for public feedback. Thank you for participating in this meeting. And remember, please submit written comments to our staff. You have until December 22nd to do that, and contact information will be provided later in this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grace. Very helpful comments to sort of set the stage for this evening's public meeting. So before we get started into the presentation, I thought we would just do a few introductions of town staff and folks from our team at Paradigm. So maybe I'll turn it over to Jamie to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jamie McCarthy, and I am the Development Engineering Supervisor, and I work in the Development Services Department with the town of Saugeen Shores.
Thanks very much, Jamie. Mark.
Sure. My name is Mark Powley, and I'm the Director of Development Services.
Great. Thanks very much. I don't believe Rahul is with us this evening. If he is, then I'd ask that introduce himself. There's Rahul. You're on mute, Rahul.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ruhul Amin, and I'm the Manager of Engineering Services.
Thanks, Rahul. And Sarah, I think we've all met Sarah. She's the Deputy Clerk, but I don't know, Sarah, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm the Deputy Clerk for the town, and I will be assisting in the background with the Zoom meeting.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And as mentioned, I'm Gene Chartier with Paradigm Transportation Solutions, and I have with me Lauren Coughlin, who is helping with this study as well. So maybe now I'll get into the presentation. So the purpose of tonight's Public Information Center is to provide you an overview of the study talk a little bit about the background and how we got to this point in the process. Also would like to present some proposed cross sections for Cottage Street reconstruction projects. This information is available online on the town's website, which we can point you to after the presentation. Also wanted to present our draft criteria for identifying potential cottage streets, which helped us narrow down the specific candidate roads that would be considered as cottage streets. And then finally finish up with our next steps in terms of where we're going next with the study. As Councillor Grace mentioned, we do have a comment form online. We encourage you to take a few minutes if you can and fill it in and share your feedback. It's very important to us to allow us to ensure that all the comments are heard and we can address any concerns that may be forthcoming as a result of the study recommendations. So thought I'd start first with just talking a little bit about a cottage street and excuse me, and it's been a great topic of conversation so far in terms of what defines a cottage street. We think it's a little bit of a misnomer in terms of the way in which we're trying to capture it as part of the process, but it's arguably, it's sort of a long-standing term in Saugeen Shores, and the community has come to accept that these roads that are in the urban beachfront areas of the town that really vary in terms of their, vary from typical engineering standards and usually have narrower rights of way. They are sort of narrow streets, as Councillor Grace was explaining. They tend to have vegetation up against them. They can be varying in width depending on where you're at. There's this sort of grouping of roads that are under public ownership, but it seem to be sort of different than a usual public street in the town. We do point out, though, that they do differ from public roads. They are public rights of way, providing public access to both seasonal and year-round residential properties, as well as other amenities in the town, including the beach areas. Now, Councillor Grace provided a little bit of background as to why the town is conducting this study. As she mentioned, during the public engagement that was completed for the town's 2020 transportation master plan, it became evident through conversation that there was a need to differentiate cottage streets from other town roads. From a roadway classification perspective, these cottage streets are deemed to be local roads. But there are a whole variety of different local road typologies in the town. They can look very different depending on where you're at in the community. So it was evident that there did need to be some differentiation of these narrower streets that tend to be down in the beachfront areas from other roads in the town. And this really became evident to town staff and to elected officials during a few recent reconstruction projects, whereby the town was attempting to reconstruct the roadway, proposed a design for the roadway that met its typical engineering standards, but didn't necessarily fully fit the context of where the road was. And that really reinforced the need for clarification and guidance on when it comes time to reconstruct these cottage streets. What should they look like, and what sort of design standards should the town be applying to be able to ensure that these cottage streets are effectively rebuilt, addressing both sort of local needs as well as the engineering needs that the town has in terms of reconstructing these roadways. So what they're looking to do is update its engineering standards to include an alternative roadway cross-section or two, or three it could be, for different cottage streets, and identify the roads where this design treatment would apply. So basically they would have an extra set of guidance beyond sort of the typical roads in the municipality that would apply on cottage streets, and have clarity around where this alternative design standard would apply. So the town embarked on the study late this summer to get underway with, coming up with the Cottage Street design standards. So the objectives were to develop this series of standards for the reconstruction of cottage streets, produce a map and a list of those streets where this alternative design standard would apply, and then bring that information forward to town council to receive its direction on applying the proposed design standards and the candidate cottage street. And really at the end of this, it's hoped that there will be greater clarity for both residents and town staff when they are contemplating the reconstruction of any of the identified cottage streets. I don't think I'm sharing my screen. Just realized that, my apologies. Okay. So the alternative design standards that we're developing, we've spent a little bit of time researching various options that are available to allow us to develop a design standard that's appropriate for the cottage streets in the town. We needed to first look and see if there were other examples that were available. And from an engineering perspective, we didn't identify very many relevant reference documents outside of complete streets manuals, which are in essence documents that municipalities use when they're looking at reconsidering the design of their roadways. And we also took guidance from some select industry guidebooks that helped us define things like minimum lane widths, minimum offsets for different services, things of that nature. And then we began from where the current town requirements are for local roads that are set out in its development manual. And basically, any town in the road, if there is a new development coming forward with the town, and there are to be local roads constructed within the development, the town would specify this set of criteria that the developer would need to meet for the construction of local roads. And generally, what they would be asking for and attempting to design for is a 20-meter right-of-way. So the amount of property, the road allowance that the municipality would hold would be 20 meters or 66 feet wide. They typically would be looking for an 8.5-meter pavement width, typically looking for concrete mountable curb and a narrow gutter, and to place sidewalk on one side of the roadway. So between those various features, that would typically be what the town would be looking to reconstruct roads within the municipality as well. So those would be the standards that they would typically apply. But it's recognized that it would be very difficult to achieve those in most cottage streets. Hence why they're looking at alternative means to be able to, or alternative cross sections for the reconstruction of the roads. So based on that, we came up with a few potential cross sections for the cottage streets. When we researched the existing inventory of streets, cottage streets, or streets within the town, it became apparent that there were, they sort of fell into a couple of categories. There was a group that looked like they were in the vicinity of about 10 meters or 33 feet of right-of-way. So we've developed a cross-section based on that amount of property so that the town, in theory, wouldn't have to acquire additional land from adjacent property owners to build this road cross-section within the available space. So they would be looking to build a 6-meter roadway and could build it with sidewalk on one side or no sidewalk at all. So that is the difference between concept 1 and concept 2. We also looked at a slightly narrower roadway, which would require sort of what's happening in many locations today, where the various road users all share the space within the roadway. So it would mean like everyone would be sharing the space. It would operate slower speeds because there is a variety of different users all in the same space. So we would be looking at, in this particular case, fitting a 4.5-meter roadway within a 10-meter right-of-way. And that could be provided with or without sidewalk on one side of the road. And then finally, we developed another concept where the right-of-way is even narrower than 10 meters. There are a few locations within the town where the property space where the roadway is located between the adjacent property lines of the abutting residential properties is only 20 feet wide or 6 meters. So in that particular case, it wouldn't be possible to develop a bidirectional roadway under most circumstances. So in these particular cases, the town would be looking to develop a roadway cross section of 3 meters for the roadway, and it wouldn't be possible to provide sidewalk under those circumstances. So I know we've been asked this question quite a bit, and I think it bears repeating in that the town in looking to do this work in most cases in many cases would be looking to convert the rural cross section where there's no curb and gutter or gutter depending on the particular location to an urban cross section. And part of the rationale for this is in terms of calming traffic. That's part of the rationale. Not the only one, but it's one of the ones that the town considers when looking at converting rural cross sections to urban sections. It also improves opportunities for connections to utilities. It helps to define the right-of-way and the property constraints. And it helps to standardize the edge of pavement treatment, which in many cases is a curb and gutter. So why curb and gutter? Part of it is that it's a maintenance feature that helps to prevent erosion and pavement failure, so the water doesn't seep underneath the pavement or seep through cracks in the pavement that would be caused by the road not being supported on the sides by the curb and gutter edge treatment. It also helps in some circumstances to collect and direct stormwater runoff. It also helps with the control of parking, as well as protecting the roadside. So trees, utility boxes, things of that nature that might be adjacent to the traveled portion of the roadway is better protected when there is a edge of pavement treatment like a curb and gutter. And it also helps to delineate the vehicle traffic and where it can operate within the roadway. So in terms of the criteria for identifying potential cottage streets, we did a little bit of analysis in terms of sort of existing conditions within the town. We obtained a number of data sets from the municipality that are map-based. And we then started looking at some commonalities, some items that differentiated potential cottage streets from other local roads within the town. And a few of the characteristics or criteria that we identified for determining potential cottage streets was, one is it primarily provides access to permanent and seasonal dwellings. So the more commercial roads are not typically candidates for cottage streets. And they, in that regard, they tend to abut or traverse an area that is a residential first density zone or an R1 zone in the town zoning bylaw. Our analysis found that they're typically within 700 meters of the shoreline, and in most cases west of Highway 21. There are a few instances where these parameters don't necessarily hold, but of the road sections, there were only a few that didn't fall within these parameters. It had to be a local road designation in the town's official plan, so it wasn't collector or arterial roads. There needed to be a speed limit of 40 kilometers per hour or less. And it had to have a right-of-way less than 20 meters and a pavement surface width that was narrower than 8.5. So really, these were the criteria that we used to, these were sort of characteristics that we used for identifying the cottage streets that are shown on the next slide. So we've identified 42 different streets. At a couple of the public meetings, we noted a few inconsistencies, I think, with maybe with ownership of the roadway or the limit, which we're currently in the process of reconciling. So if there are sections that aren't, maybe aren't under municipal ownership or are under municipal ownership and not there, definitely let us know through the comment forms. That would be very helpful. We are, again, taking under advisement a number of the comments that we received last week and are looking at them as well. But if there are ones, then by all means, let us know from there. So we've identified 42 candidate streets. Most of them are in Southampton. There are a few in Port Elgin and a number in the former Saugeen Township. We have a list of all of the candidate streets on the town's website. So if there are particular locations, and I can also pull up the presentation if there is a request for identifying a specific location. But at this time, we have the mapping that depicts the particular streets that have been identified as candidates for cottage streets. So just a couple more slides and then happy to take some questions. So following tonight's Public Information Center, we are starting to receive a number of comments on the study and the material that's been presented. So we will be spending time reviewing that and addressing the comments that are received. We anticipate there will need to be some refinement of the cross sections based on the feedback and input that we receive, as well as confirming the list of cottage streets based on the feedback that's received. Once all of that is reconciled and we've had an opportunity to make sure that we're satisfied, we've addressed the comments appropriately and also met the municipality's needs, we would then be presenting our study report, which would have recommendations that would flow through to town council for its consideration. So that's anticipated to happen early in the new year, but it will depend to a great extent on the amount and nature of the comments and feedback that we receive, as some may take longer to reconcile than others. So we want to make sure that we properly address those comments and don't necessarily rush something back to town council, but there is, the town does need to move forward with the initiative, as there are some projects that are planned for 2024 in the Cottage Street areas that the town would be looking to begin applying this process with coming up in the new year. So again, thank you very much for taking the time this evening to join with us for the presentation. Obviously, you can get involved by asking questions or discussing the concerns with the project team following this presentation. The town's website has the information. There is a QR code on the comment sheet, but excuse me, but you can gain access to the information just by going to the town's website. There is a copy of this presentation. It is dated November 2023, but we haven't changed any of the content just because today is December. We did put today's date on the presentation, but the presentation is exactly the same as the one that is posted. For the in-person events, we also provided a few display boards that just provided a much bigger view of the slides that we've presented, excuse me, as well as the list of the individual projects. So that's also available online. And we've also used the comment form. We've also placed the comment form in a digital version online as well. As Councillor Grace has mentioned, we'd like to receive comments back by December the 22nd to enable us to keep moving forward with the process. That doesn't mean that we won't consider comments or input after that date, but we do want to keep the process moving forward. So we would request that if you aren't able to respond by that date, to please let us know, and then we can look at some other means of enabling you to provide comments. We introduced Jamie earlier. She is the town's contact for the project. So that's her information there. We have set up a project-specific email address that you can reach at roadstudy@saugeenshores.ca. So again, thank you for attending this evening. We truly appreciate your input, and comments are very welcome. So I will turn it back to Sarah at this point, and we can start to entertain some questions unless anyone else from the study team wishes to make any comments at this time.
Hi there. So I have 4 attendees with their hands raised, so I can allow them to speak. Should anyone else wish to provide comments, please raise your hand and I will move you over one at a time for your turn. Thank you. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Sarah. I just wondered if there was a queue, but I'm first to go.
Yes, you are.
Excellent. I don't know if my camera's on or not. But doesn't matter. So you can hear me clearly, which is the main thing. So really appreciate the presentation from Jean, as well as Councillor Grace's opening commentary. And you said something that was really resonated with me in the fact that the heritage cottages in Saugeen Shores, and we have a cottage in Southampton. Those heritage cottages are some of the most important and vibrant parts of our community. And my wife and I and our family have been enjoying the community for the last 4 years and love our time up there. So it was interesting in the presentation that it took almost 20 minutes for any mention of stormwater with curbs and gutters and the proposed streets. And I'm really pleased that there's a list of the streets on the website. I haven't had a chance to review it yet, but we are on the corner of Adelaide and Huron, and Adelaide is a classic cottage street by the definition you guys just talked about. So this is I've got a 2-part question. In October of this year, our cottage incurred very significant flooding damage that was precipitated by a town-approved grade and drainage plan from our neighbors to the west of us who did a massive renovation. And these renovations are going on all around Southampton and adjoining adjacent area. But we had no issues with water prior to that. And basically now our cottage, the property is no longer usable because we're sitting in a basin of water and we're the lowest property in the neighborhood. And we don't have access to good drainage. So I guess the 2-part question is, what is the township doing to incorporate into this plan to protect cottage owners like ourselves from this very, very significant damage and flooding? Like literally, and Jamie's seen our property. There's times when we have a foot plus of standing water in our backyard. Like we are literally in a basin of water and we cannot use our property now. Not to mention the damage to our foundation, crawl space, and the structure itself. So what is the township doing to consider to protect that from happening against other properties in the neighborhood? And I guess how is that going to be incorporated in the broader plan with the township?
Okay, I can start the response, Dave, and thank you for your question. And appreciate and empathize with your concerns. So I guess one of the means of, one of the objectives of, and in certain cases it applies, certain cases doesn't, that there is opportunities through better managing the road drainage that there can be less impacts on adjacent properties. So that's one of the methods and one of the reasons for urbanization of roadways is to help manage stormwater. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with your specific concerns as to whether there was an element of the road involved or not. But in this particular case, there are opportunities basically the storm drainage system deals primarily with draining the roadway, but sometimes there are opportunities to address the adjacent properties as part of the drainage. But it is something like, in terms of the edge of pavement treatment and the drainage treatment, something that we take into consideration for the roadway, but there hasn't been, we haven't looked at how we can solve drainage issues that are outside of the road right away.
Yeah, so Gene, I'm just going to jump in really quickly because our issue is precipitated and exacerbated by the roadway, which is Adelaide. And anybody who lives in that neighborhood and has a property adjacent to Adelaide and Knowles and Huron affectionately calls Adelaide Lake Adelaide. Like, so any water at all, the Cottage Street becomes a standing pool of water. And then that water goes to the lowest part of land, which is our lot right now, because of the retaining walls erected by our neighbors. And there is no appropriate drainage on that Cottage Street. So that's my whole point, right? As you guys build up this plan and the 43 target streets in Southampton, there has to be the consideration of appropriate drainage in neighborhoods where there is none, right? So, and we are bearing the brunt of it right now, but at the town's recommendation, when and if we do renovate our property, the recommendation is for us to increase our lot elevation by 2 to 3 feet, erect a draining wall, and send the water to our adjacent neighbors. And that is not a solution for anybody except for us, right? So it's the drainage on Adelaide has to be considered in any plan. Otherwise, the whole neighborhood is just going to be one progressive problem after another. And unfortunately, we're bearing the brunt of it right now.
No, thank you for that. One of the challenges with a study of this nature is that we're sort of looking at it generically at this point in time. So we're looking at what a typical design or the typical criteria would look like for a roadway design. But one of the things that I've communicated in the previous one is that this is a starting place, a template that would then enable the town, as they do the planning and design for any reconstruction project, to take into consideration specific local needs as part of the process. So it certainly seems to me that this is an example where, you know, there are a variety of other of specific factors that you have to design for as you go about you know, sort of implementing the cross section. So, Councillor Grace.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. I'm sorry, very, very sorry to hear about your situation. It sounds like you have contacted town staff?
Multiple times. Back in July, as soon as the wall was erected in our neighbor's property, and that was several times this summer, town staff, including Jamie, and then in October when the flooding occurred. And that I don't want to draw this up because this is a public forum, but we've contacted 11 engineers to get assessments of our property, and we're still trying to get a fix, and all of it at our own expense. So I contacted Luke, Mayor Charbonneau, when it happened, the local MPP, and we don't have any solution from the township. So, and that's why we want to be proactive in how you guys are solutioning for the cottage streets in the neighborhood, because we're being thoughtful about our neighbors in the community, because we love the community so much.
Well, I know that when Lambert Lane was reconstructed in 2018-19, there were some significant drainage issues there on property, and I believe those were resolved after the reconstruction of that lane, because they did reconstruction work with, you know, now I'm getting into what I don't know anything about, but it was not just the surface, but the pipes underground and that kind of thing. So
yeah, and that's what
That
That's
will
what needs to be
resolved.
addressed. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank
Tha-
you. Do you mind
Thank
if
you.
I move on to the next person? We
No,
have quite a list here.
yeah, no, go ahead, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so next we have Alice.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hear you loud and
okay.
clear.
Okay, thank you. I actually have 3 questions, but I think I'll try to keep it down to, I know there's other people, but so let me just take up a question I had around Dave's issue, which is that I live in a city where I have a cottage on Knowles Lane, and of course, like everybody, we love it. But that's I assume Knowles is probably on the list of cottage streets. It doesn't get it's narrow and so on. In the city I live in, the movement is towards disconnecting storm drains and promoting filter drainage of stormwater as a more environmental and also solution, and also handles doesn't overwhelm the city storm drainage system, and lead to flooding and so on and backups into houses. So to the extent that, for example, if you wanted to create a driveway on your property, it would have to be by using a city approved permeable surface. You can't pave it anymore. It has to be permeable. There has to be a place for stormwater to filter into the soil and be managed that way instead of directed towards storm drains. And as I said, also we have to, there's a move to disconnecting the kind of storm drains that lead from your east troughs down into the city storm drain. So it seems either Southampton is really, really different, or we're just kind of following 30 years behind what cities have learned don't work.
Well, thank you for your question and comment. One of the, and this has actually come up a couple times already in our conversations, is that there are situations, sort of, I think as you heard the previous speaker talk about, where there are local needs that contemplate, or where storm drainage system may be helpful in terms of addressing certain needs. There are going, though, to be situations where they may not. And I think what we're trying to do in this particular, with the work that we're doing, is set up a sort of a standard or a generic template that enables the municipality, if they are going to implement storm drainage, if there's municipal services, things of that nature, where do you locate them within the road allowance? And that's part of the exercise, is to help identify where those things would go within the road allowance if it was to be designed in that manner. There are situations, and I agree with you, that don't necessitate a storm drainage system. There will be circumstances where that's not necessary, but we're planning in case of specific circumstances where it would need to be applied.
Okay, so there'll be a second step where you'll determine whether those 42 streets require it to be applied in the next budgeting cycle.
It wasn't overly clear on sort of where the town takes this from here. Is that as Councillor Grace mentioned earlier on, the town has a long capital road improvement list. So it may be 5-10 years before some of these roads get addressed. But typically, what the municipality would do would in their preparation for the reconstruction, they would engage with the community to let know the plans, and then discuss what the configuration and the design would look like. And these guidelines, these standards for the engineering standards as to where items get placed, serve as the basis, as the starting point for moving forward in terms of establishing what the cross section within the roadway would look like. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Greg.
Maybe I'm on mute.
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, said I'd unmute. Anyways, adding to the stormwater thoughts and this 5 to 10 year capital plan, will Saugeen Shores kind of look at prioritizing streets where there is a flooding issue so that some of these things don't have to wait until 2029 and hopefully address these issues now rather than after a whole bunch of buildings fall down?
Thank you for your question. It's a little beyond the scope of our assignment in terms of looking at reprioritizing the town's capital plan. But I think Jamie may be able to shed a little light on that process.
So typically the town and every municipality is required to have an asset management plan.
Yeah.
So within that plan and through the act, it actually indicates what needs to be prioritized within what will be financially impactful. So the town does the same. So water, sewer, and storm are all very high priorities. So we want to make sure that we're all in line with those three components before we bring a road project to council to say this is the road that needs to be redone. It should be a road that needs new water, new sewer, and hopefully we can do upgrades to the road and also the storm infrastructure.
Okay, so a Lake Adelaide would get priority over something that's fairly dry at this point, or how does
it more determines on about the water and the sewer and the age as well as the condition. So sometimes if there's water main breaks continually on a roadway and maybe that road is still only 50 years old, that would be something that is causing maintenance and is required for improvement because it's causing issues. That would be somewhat of a priority over something that doesn't cause those type of water main issues.
Okay. Well, so hopefully you guys can walk Adelaide after a storm and see that there are some issues and it may be causing issues at adjacent properties. So.
Oh, for sure. I know speaking with the Public Works Department, so they're very knowledgeable in a lot of the aspects of the town of Saugeen Shores. They drive the roads every day, they plow the roads. So they're one of the departments that really does feed into what should be going into our asset management plan as well as far as operational concerns and like other items. And Adelaide for sure has been one that has been flagged for issues like drainage issues.
And we talked about how far out some of these projects might be, but how close in might some of these projects be? Like when do some shovels go on the ground and start improving the infrastructure?
So as Councillor Grace had indicated, her street, her Cottage Street is due in 2029, but it could be as soon as 2024. So staff have proposed through the asset management plan that Peel Street, Macaulay, Burns, all of those hopefully would be reconstructed next year.
Okay, because again, walking around, they aren't nearly as wet as Adelaide. And so I would hope you would give consideration to accelerating the Adelaide portion of the program.
Okay, and there we can totally look into that. As far as 2024, those projects have already been submitted to council. So we can see where that might line up in the future.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, next up is Sheila.
Hello, I would like to thank Councillor Cheryl Grace, first of all, for initiating the study because I think it's really important and it's that the town has some alternative options to the options that the town currently has for the design of cottage streets. My concern is with adding curbs to all of your options, because I believe that curbs create a barrier for people who want to quickly move off the street to avoid vehicles. And I'm thinking of people on mobility scooters, people riding bikes, pushing strollers, pulling beach carts. When you have a curb, getting off the street quickly can be a problem. In the Netherlands, they have adopted a design called the Woonerf, WOONERF. And these are curbless streets that allow equal access to all levels and all types of mobility. And in Canada, actually, I know this because I did a little search today on Canadian Newsstream, the database that indexes newspapers all across Canada. And I found 195 articles when I put in Woonerf. And it's being adopted in Banff, Nanaimo, Montreal, Waterloo, Sault Ste. Marie, Toronto, Winnipeg, Saint Henri, Quebec. And so this curbless design is now, well, I won't call it cutting edge because it's been popular in Europe for decades, for a very long time. It's now coming to North America. And we are now talking about adding curbs when other places are taking them away. And I'm not just talking about old streets that currently have curbs that are removing them. I've also learned that there are new developments being created. Forgotten where it was now, but one development in Ottawa. It has 800 units. It's new, and the streets are all narrow and curbless. And so why are we, when we already have curbless streets that are working very well, why would we want to confine people who are using these streets by adding curbs? So I really would like the study to produce options that are curbless.
Well, thank you for that. I too am familiar with the Woonerf concept and have done some design work related to that. It's certainly one of the things that we're going to explore a little further. We have heard a number of comments so far about concerns about curbing. And I think one of the things we're going to explore a little further is that there are different forms of curbing that don't necessarily create the same sort of barrier as a barrier curb do, but still enable the municipality to achieve some of its maintenance and traffic management objectives. So we're going to look at some alternatives in terms of what we can do on the edge of pavement. I've been softening the messaging a little bit around edge of pavement treatment versus hard curb and gutter, because you're right, there are situations where it doesn't necessarily apply. But I think, as I mentioned to the last person and asking sort of about why are we still pursuing things like stormwater drainage. In this particular case, it is a tool in the toolbox that there are going to be some situations where it may be very appropriate or necessary to have curbing. So we're looking at it as sort of this is the guideline, but there will be opportunities as the town implements to look at different treatments as they proceed through. I think that's one of the things that we're coming to, is that this is going to be more of a process than a hard and fast set of this is exactly what you do in every circumstance. It's be more of a process to fit the context, the street design to the context.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mark, would you?
Thank you. I just thought, Jean, it would be helpful. Can you talk a bit more about what we mean when we say curb and gutter? I think your current toolkit includes mountable curbs, which might be applied more often than the physical vertical curbs that people might be visualizing.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit more about mountable curbs and how that relates to people using scooters and other wheeled ways of getting around? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. Thank you for the note. So, like I said, we're talking about edge of pavement treatments, and they are sort of all categorized or lumped into the same category of curb and gutter. And I think in people's minds, they default to the idea of sort of that 6-inch high barrier curb that is does form a very hard edge on the side of the road. And there will be circumstances where that may be necessary. For example, when there's a particular drainage issue that requires the barrier curb to assist with directing the drainage to the appropriate location. There may be circumstances where there's a particular edge of something in the boulevard, that needs to be protected for some reason. But in many instances, the sort of the curb and gutter would be more of like a rolled curb, and the town's starting to use that in more circumstances now, whereby it's pretty much completely mountable in terms of it's like a rolled, and you can mount it with a vehicle or with a scooter or something of that nature, and it's less intrusive than sort of the barrier curb. So, and then some of the other options can also be just having gutter, not a curb at all. That there needs to be sort of a transition piece to transition from the boulevard to the roadway. So that can take a variety of different forms, whether that's an asphalt gutter, so there's continuation of the road surfacing, concrete gutter and curb, mountable curb. We haven't really got a lot at this point in time into the various finishes or treatments. It's more on the dimensions, because we're just trying to see what will fit and how it will fit. But there will be some more dialogue and information and guidance being provided on materials and treatments as we move forward. Councillor Grace, if you wanted to add something. You're on mute, unfortunately.
Sorry, I just thought that I would mention that something I've learned through the last 2 meetings that I hadn't thought about in this way is that the curb, whatever form it takes, has a practical purpose of helping to retain the integrity and condition of the road surface. I know that as a counselor, I receive, and we're talking about Adelaide Street, that's a good example of a road that's in very poor condition. One of the reasons why, as staff explained to me well before this study, is that we're experiencing more of a climate change related freeze and thaw cycles, which are damaging the surfaces of our roads and streets. And apparently this type of whatever kind of curb or structure that's used to maintain the road surface helps with that. So that's just something to think about when you're considering the issue of curbs, and the fact that Jean has mentioned that there are different formats that they're considering is good, I think.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Al.
Hi, I'm going to let Anne answer the question.
Oh, okay. Ask it, Robert.
Yeah, right.
So this is Ann and Al. We are on Laird Lane, and which is unpaved, and we are hoping that it remains so. As certainly since my childhood, almost all cottage streets were unpaved. They were environmentally sound in terms of being, small gravelly sand and water washed away. People, bikes, walkers, cars shared easily. We were previously owned at Chantry View, Heritage Cottage at Chantry View and Lake, and that particular upgrade was disastrous. With curbs and sidewalks and the sort of suburbanization of a cottage area. But we're very hopeful. We didn't see anything in this presentation about the retention of unpaved lanes, which are very narrow in our case, have vegetation. There's even, residential parts of properties that are literally, just inches from the edge of the lane. And we're assuming they're pretty low maintenance. All they do is pour some water on it to keep the dust down. So anyway, we're quite pleased that Laird Lane is on the list, but we're hoping, unlike what happened in Knowles, even Burns, in my long life as a seasonal resident of Southampton, that it doesn't become paved. And so that's what we're wondering about, those options.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for your question, and I do appreciate that it was helpful to share some of your context, because it is, I think it's important for us all to appreciate that. Part of the reason the town initiated the study was that they envision over the coming years the need to reconstruct several cottage streets. I don't know specifically where in the timeline your street lies, so it could be out into the future. It could be within the 10 years. I don't know the specific timing of it, but at this point in time, the intention is that with the reconstruction works, that they would end up with a paved roadway, because that's sort of the purpose of undertaking the reconstruction. But I don't know the specifics of your particular, unfortunately, your particular street, as to whether that there, would be a rationale or a need to leave it unpaved. But generally, the intent of this exercise is to establish the parameters around which the town will reconstruct the cottage streets within the municipality.
I guess the other part is that Laird is really, there's people who do cut throughs on it, but mostly residents use it just to get to their places. The other thing, if you could preserve some unpaved parts of the cottage area, which is really the charm of it, as well as the environmental value of it, because we don't get flooding, we don't get that sort of thing. There also is the issue of, and of course people can't park on it because it's, single lane.
Yeah, let me just.
So I'll just finish one thing on that point, which is also, in what ways could certain places be, restricted in terms of driving, except to residents. So I'll let my husband go on.
Yeah, just to add, Laird Lane between Morpeth and Palmerston is not paved, and there is no sewer that runs down there. It only comes in from Palmerston to our place, about 100 yards, and I don't think it's on the other end at all. And there's no water lines that run down it. The only way it could be treated would be your design 6, because I believe it's less than 20 feet wide, and there are huge trees and fences and garages that abut right up against it. So it would require significant property acquisition and demolition even to do design 6. So and being that there is no storm sewer that runs down the length of Laird Lane or utilities other than what come in from Palmerston, I doubt whether it would be something that would be required to be improved based on the plan parameters. Because if you did pave it, you would create stormwater runoff issues. Because right now everything percolates away and it's not a problem. So paving it would do nothing but cause stormwater issues, which I've experienced in the past as a developer.
And which we experienced on
which we experienced at Chantry View and Lake, because all the stormwater, when they designed it originally, there weren't enough catch basins, and all the stormwater was supposed to run to the end of Chantry View with one catch basin, which would not handle the 90% increase in flow that was caused by the curbs and gutters that were put in. And it had to be redesigned after the public meeting, and we pointed out there weren't enough stormwater catch basins.
and it destroyed our garage footings in the process.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry to hear that. So I guess, you know, as I've remarked earlier, each road will be considered sort of on its own, you know, sort of merit, and you know, when and if the town gets to Ear Street, it, you know, it's hard to say exactly what the proposed approach would be, but what we're trying to do is set out some guidelines and parameters that the town would consider when they're getting, you know, they're going forward with the reconstruction.
In those guidelines, in those guidelines and parameters, I wonder if you could put some recommendations as to what the residents want. Before Shanty Views Drive was redone, we surveyed everybody on the property, everybody on the lane, and got a letter, and not a single person wanted this done. But the town moved forward with it anyway, despite the resistance from all the residents.
It was 100 people against it at the meeting, but that's passed.
Yeah.
But we're just hoping that you can, I mean, actually, as I think about it, we may be the only ones who literally, at least in that part of Laird, who have our property address as Laird. The rest face the paved Grosvenor or Huron. And,
Laird is primarily a back alley.
It's a back alley for
properties
on Huron and Grosvenor. So we're the only one with actually a resident address on Laird in that section of it.
So whenever there is going to be a road reconstruction project completed in the future, there will be opportunity for any member of the public to have input during that time when we do the public information sessions at that, like whenever that road's going to get redone. So for sure, there'll be more opportunity for comments later on.
Our main concern is that input be listened to, because it hasn't been in the past.
Well, it's not so much that, but I want built into the cottage notion, you know, this cottage section, that there is, you know, that there are different types of roadways. They're not all, you know, commonly used by the public. And so I just wanted to, you know, at least hold open the possibility that we could keep some unpaved parts right of the cottage area.
Okay, well, if there's
very little.
I'm sorry.
Of which there is very little left.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we will hear from Mike.
You got me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So first off, before I sort of ask the questions about my area, which is north of the Saugeen River, I just want, and I'm sorry about that telephone ring. I want to Mr. O'Neill has highlighted something here that has become very evident in a number of developments that have been presented out in our area and elsewhere in Saugeen Shores. The town is dealing with, or not dealing with, a chronic high water table issue. And there are plenty of studies out there that demonstrate that once you start putting basements into land that has a water table that's sometimes as high as less than 3 feet below the surface, you're going to impact the neighboring properties. And I would not be at all surprised if that's what happened with Mr. O'Neill's property, is having a great big huge basement built next door to it without any real consideration being putting into groundwater testing. That's the kind of outcome that happens. And there are two developments, particularly in the north part of Southampton, that seem to be taken very lightly. And in fact, one of the developments, the developer said for a 1.87 hectare property that they were going to bring in roughly more than 2 meters of fill. The calculation on that for that property is 3,200 truckloads. I'd like to see what Ottawa Street looks like after that. Now, so in their first meeting, somebody told me that they asked the question, why is the north part of Southampton not included in the study? And I understand the reason that was given was that all the right-of-ways in that part of the town are already 60 feet. Well, we've been completely repaved in 12 years ago, It's all narrow streets and drive over curbs. It houses the longest running stretch of waterfront property in Saugeen Shores. If you include the east part of South Rankin Street on the east part of, along the Saugeen River east of the Highway 21, it's totaling over 4 kilometers. If you look at some of these sections are definitely not 60 feet road allowances, because I've looked at some site plans, and many people along this stretch, 3.1 kilometers of it is actually on Lake Huron. Many people have purchased property from the town, in part along the west side of those streets, which would be Shore Road, Blanchfield and Eckford. People are built to 10 feet from the property line because they're restricted to how far forward west they can go by the Conservation Authority. So I feel very strongly that, regardless of what the purpose is here, that area needs to be included, and the residents in that area need to get some assurance that the town is not going to come along and do something without the residents' input. The other issue there, along Shore Road, the first stretch of it from the lighthouse to where it ends up at Deer Run, literally the road allowance is in the lake. So, especially in the high water points, the uprush of the lake comes to within, it splashes over the rocks and goes onto the road in high winds in the fall. And in another section along Deer Run, there's a tree preservation area in a new subdivision that's being promoted there now. And it's on the west side, the front side, the street side of the property. So that is going to be in the road allowance as well. So my question is, why are we not including the north part there? And, why are we not doing it? Why are we not including that?
Okay, well, thank you for your question. So at this point in time, we've laid out our draft or proposed criteria for identifying Cottage Street. We've heard in a couple of situations that folks felt it may be narrowly defined. So, we're certainly taking input into, whether we want to, or whether there's, need to expand or alter the criteria to take more, to include more locations into the list of cottage streets. One of the things that I've tried to communicate to folks is that, the reason the big driver for the town at this point in time is that they have upcoming reconstruction projects of some of these roads identified in their capital plan. And, if a road isn't an impending reconstruction candidate, then this won't really come into play from the perspective of the town won't necessarily be looking to reconstruct roads that have been rehabbed or rebuilt, in the recent history. So there are locations we know that probably if the road hadn't been recently rebuilt or hadn't been changed, then we might end up on the list for the purposes of identifying cottage streets. But because this is more of a going forward exercise, whereby they would be looking at roads that they would be reconstructing, that's part of the reason in some cases that certain roads don't show up.
Mike, did you have another question?
Yeah, I was just going to say that in response to Jean's response there, I think it's well known in the town of Saugeen Shores that there certainly within the municipal offices anyways, that there's, and in our area, that there's some very severe problems with the sewer installation that was done there at the same time that the roads were done. I think all of the neighbors in our neighborhood are very happy with the narrow streets and the drive over curbs. And certainly if the street in front of my cottage that I had to go back towards the road with, because the EH line's running through right through the middle of the place, I wouldn't have any parking. If the road was expanded to twice the size it is now, I wouldn't even be able to park a car anymore. But there's the existence of a very severe sewer issue there. Notwithstanding what the sewer report is currently saying about more development helping, it's not going to help because the problems are bigger than a force main that's not being properly maintained. And at some point, some of these roads are going to have to be torn up, and I think the town is aware of that. So, you know, I think some serious consideration has to be given to including this area into the study and making sure that it doesn't get messed up down the road.
No, fair point. And, you know, as I said, we've heard it a couple of times from folks. So it's something we'll definitely take into consideration.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to Britta.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for taking my question. I was looking particularly at at Saugeen Township a map, or the former Saugeen Township map, and I noticed that there are a number of roads in the Cottage area that are not marked in the Cottage Road study marking, and some of them I can guess it's because it might be a private road or just a lane where there's no properties really on that. But then what I was wondering about in that section that goes from number 25 to along Shipley Avenue, Gobles Grove Beach, and then to Queens Bush Beach, and then northeast to past the Queens Bush Beach, it's not marked at all. And so there are a couple of the Virginia Lane, which is right near the CAW section. Yeah, so you got Virginia Lane right near the CAW section, and then right beside CAW, and then there's a small little two little cul-de-sac parts that are just a little bit south, right there. Yeah, so if you go to the two little cul-de-sacs where there are just a couple of houses there, and then if you go northeast along that, yeah, keep going northeast along that, and then it stopped. But it doesn't go continue. Then you stop right there. So then there's a cul-de-sac. So you stop, right? Correct. And so I was wondering why the two little cul-de-sac sections and the unpaved Virginia Lane are marked, but the section of Shipley that goes from Shipley Avenue, Cottage number 2, Shipley Avenue down to, I don't know, 30 or something like that, 40, 30, 35, 36, at the, in McKinnon Lane at Queens Bush, where it says Queens Bush Beach. I was just wondering why the color stopped and why it's continued, why you've got it in the Virginia Lane right beside the Gobles Grove Beach area. There are a couple of cul-de-sacs there, but it doesn't include the cul-de-sac all the way to the end of Queens Bush.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for your question. That was actually one of the areas last week that participants in our previous PICs had indicated that there seemed to be some ambiguity. So we're looking specifically in that area because it appears that our records don't necessarily match what people's expectations or what they think is happening in the area. So we're going back to check that one just to make sure that it isn't wrong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Michael.
Are you able to hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's good. Well, let me first thank you all for taking on this this public information session. It's been very informative for me. I've not attended a previous one. I, by way of background, live on Macaulay, right near Peel, and I back onto Lambert Lane, which was redone, as the councillor said, in the last few years. And I guess I was trying to understand, Jean, what was meant by a curb and gutter design. So I'm sitting on Google Images in the background here, and I guess I hear the word mountable, and there's n number of different choices in the multimodal handbook, which I guess is one of the images that's up there, and some of them don't look very mountable. I don't think they're intended to be, because they got verticals and extruded bituminous curbs and things like that. But I think of the one, and maybe I should just make sure that we understand. I'm trying to make certain I can get onto my property and back off of it. And I can do that right now on Lambert Lane with the way it was built. I think that would qualify as a mountable curb, would it not, Councillor? I don't know if you're familiar with what they Lambert Lane, but I can drive over that easily onto my property when I need to access it from the back. And if there was to be a sidewalk and a non-mountable curb on the Macaulay side of my property, I would not be able to get my car off the street, and I'd be contributing to congestion on the street. And so some of these pictures that I've got out of Google Images show some pretty formidable looking curb and gutter designs that don't look very mountable at all, which would mean I then leave my car on the street on Macaulay instead of it being brought up onto, I would assume part of it at least is my property, and it's off the street. And so therefore I don't cause any congestion with two vehicles. But if there was a non-mountable curb, I would be forced to leave my car on the street. And instead of helping the situation, it seems to me it would make it worse. So I like the idea that was presented earlier about the Woonorf concept and mountable curbs. If that is what has happened on Lambert Lane at the rear of my property, I am able to get up and down that very easily. And I get on, I load what I need to load, and I take what I need to take, and I can park a car or two in the back on my property and further taking them off the street. But if there was to be some type of a curb and gutter that was 6 to 8 inches high, then I'm not going to start climbing that with my vehicles, and I'll just leave them on the street, won't I?
Councillor.
Sure. Michael, I am familiar with Lambert Lane and Macaulay. I understand what you're saying totally, but I'm not an engineer. So I should leave the technical response to Jean or Jamie. But I totally understand your point, and that's why I hope that any design forthcoming on Macaulay would be cognizant of that, especially since we have a requirement from November 1st to, I believe, March 31st that cars should not be parked overnight on the street because of snow plowing. So that's
right. And see, that's a very good point, because we did live there sort of on and off over the last couple of winters, and we've had it plowed by a service, and so sure, I could take my car right off the street. But if there was a sidewalk there or a non-mountable curb, I don't have any choice but to leave it. Well, I mean, where do I put it? It's as simple as that. Where will I go with that vehicle so that plowing can happen overnight?
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great
What a mess. And I'm not the only one. Obviously, there's 10 or 15 people that live on that street. Are we going to deposit vehicles, on surrounding streets where we are permitted to do that, which just clutters up those streets? I as much as anything, I'm probably saying I like it the way it is. The Woonorf, is a nice seamless transition from road to, the vegetation and the grass on the side. And I can obviously bring my vehicle onto my property and get it off the street, and I don't mind that. My grass looks terrible there because it's hard to keep it up when you're chewing it up with your tires. But that's the way it goes. And I think it makes for a tidier presentation of the street, and probably takes away from congestion and likely in some way makes it safer by taking my cars off the street. And when I say cars, it's usually plural. So I would think that we'd want to get, as much off the fairly narrow road that it is in any way that we can. And so I'm sitting here looking at these images, thinking, wow, I would never climb this, some of these curb and gutter, designs. They're basically a sidewalk. It's a sidewalk design without a sidewalk, but it's got a 6 or 8 inch barrier. I think, well, that forces me to stay on the street. Well, anyway, that's about.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. And I think one of the items that we'll need to be bringing back is some illustrations of sort of what this might look like, so that people can get a better sense. We attempted through the sort of the illustrations that we've prepared to try to give some perspective, but I think it would be better if we had some actual pictures. So we'll look to, as we move forward, so that there's clarity in terms, and I think that's really what the town's trying to achieve through all of this, is that there's clarity. So, like we would, I think it would be beneficial for us to provide a few photos as part of the work that we produce as to what this might look like.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to pipe in a little bit. We have a cottage on Adelaide, and we've been vacationing in Southampton for over 50 years. And so I remember when Knowles Lane was the dirt road. And I would also prefer Laird Lane to stay as a dirt road. And probably like most people in Southampton, they like it the way it is. I like being able to, what Sheila said, if you have a bike, you can easily move off the road onto the gravel. And we have a gravel driveway, so that's permeable. We are still having issues with flooding in our backyard due to the retaining wall. But my question mostly is on your curb and gutter slide. Where does you had mentioned 2 things, that the curb and gutter would help with parking control. And I feel like that kind of inhibits parking, because right now we park on our property, but with a curb, we wouldn't be able to. And then the second thing is, where does it collect and direct the stormwater?
Good questions. Thank you. So in terms of the controlling parking, I appreciate that in your location, there's been a longstanding practice of being able to park off of the road onto your properties. And I'm not going to comment one way or the other with regards to sort of the direction that may head. But there are some locations though where it's not desirable to have people to be able to kind of park willy-nilly wherever it is. So it might not be your street, but there are other streets where there are some parking challenges. And there are advantages in certain circumstances of being able to use a curb system to control where parking occurs, so that it doesn't kind of happen in a haphazard manner. So that's an example of where you might want to consider a curb, whether it's a barrier curb or some other form that helps to guide people where to park, as opposed to sort of parking all over the place. So that would be an example of where we might use a curb for parking control. And there are circumstances where the curb and gutter helps to collect the water. So when you think about when the water hits the road or hits your property, and in some cases, in certain locations, the road's probably the easiest example to give, where when the water hits the road, the curb and gutter on the edge is where the water runs to, and then the gutter is where the water flows along. So if there are locations where it's not desirable or it's difficult for the water just to pour off the side of the road and onto a property or something like that, then you can use the curb and the gutter to help direct that water to the outlet you want it to get to. So whether that is some sort of storm management system, whether that is an outfall to a ditch, whether that is some other feature, there are situations where you do need that positive control that's provided by a curb and a gutter to get water to the location where you want it to outfall to, as opposed to just outfalling anywhere. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Claudia here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Claudia. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I think I've just been given permission. So, thank you to everyone for undertaking the study. I empathize with the first speaker because I drive through Lake Adelaide to get home. I live on Macaulay. And so I would say one thing is that fixing Adelaide should be a much higher priority than doing anything to Macaulay. Your presentation says you're standardizing on curb and gutter. And you've just recently been speaking about how the gutter is used to control where the water goes. Well, I would like to see curbless options. And those I've spoken to on Macaulay, we don't want nor need storm drains or sewers. What we want is for you to compact the edge of the asphalt and shoulder it, which will give it strength. And then we want to allow the stormwater to run off the road surface to seep naturally into the sandy soil. I'd also suggest that you really don't want to dig up my street to put in any kind of underground infrastructure like sewers. There are underground streams in this area, and if the town breaks into one of them, you're going to risk flooding crawl spaces all along the street. And I witnessed what happened when a neighbor tried to put in a basement. So I can really say that, I saw a 4-inch drain pipe just flooding the street in front of my house and the neighbors until I called the town to have it stop. So please just leave our street the way it is. Yes, we'd like to have it repaired and paved, perhaps a little bit nicer, but please find an option that does not involve curb and gutter. So that's my request. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Hi there. My name is Nathan. Thank you very much for being patient and taking all of our questions. I had a few questions and comments. Firstly, I wanted to understand the work product and who might be engaged. I understand development engineering is leading this. I've reviewed the town's official plan. I'm keenly aware of the historical nature that we hear in all these comments of the town. It's recognized as a special purpose area and policy area. There's recognition about the historical nature. We know a lot of determination on what streetscape and what character of a neighborhood be is a mix of certain housing typologies, built forms, streetscape, etc. It's unmistakable in Southampton, and we all recognize what that feels like. And I understand Schedule B of the official plan recognizes all the streets equally, and I appreciate that the town wants to provide some recognition, perhaps, of what these streets might be different. And I think we all can recognize that no one wants a 20-meter right-of-way with curbing and sidewalks with 8 meters of paved surface. So my question is, one, will you amend Schedule B? Will a planner be engaged? Will a special plan amendment or a report to city council or town council be provided to assess the determination on how these changes, if and when they're being brought forward through the capital program, meet the policy of the official plan, how it meets, will there be urban design guidelines, as well as determination on how this meets the official plan. So that's my planning question. My second question is about some things that Jean and Jamie sort of spoke about in the determination and dealing with stormwater and overall flows. I think we all recognize that some of these outfalls in stormwater management in the area are not being dealt with through traditional stormwater management. There's no ponds in the area, and a lot of them are outfalling directly into the lake. So with curb and gutter designs, the crest and the fall of the road allow the water to take to storm catch basins, which don't see that much drainage right now, except for on high storm water days. Will there be plans for oil and grit separators? Will there be settling for the siltation control into the lake? And the questions relating to that is, how is the SPCA engaged? Is there a municipal class EA proposed? And I want to understand the flows that are going to be taken additionally, because I think right now, at least from my experience on Laird, it's all filtered through the existing permeable surfaces, whether it's driveways that are permeable, and as well as the grass and other soft landscaping features. So those are the two sort of areas that I wanted to just assess, and like what the work product is, who's supporting this work, and I also echo my friend's submissions on a status quo option to add to that to those design elements that you have. So I'm just trying to understand how this fits into the process. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for your questions. It certainly is a lot to unpack, and I will do my best to try to respond to you. And if we do need help from others, I will ask them as we go along. So I'll start with the planning questions. So, and maybe I'll back it up and say that the genesis of this project was an engineering concern about town staff recognizing that the current engineering guidance doesn't meet the needs in these particular locations, because the sort of typical criteria don't fit. So to date, we've been approaching this from an engineering perspective on the basis that there needed to be an alternative cross section. Sort of what we've heard a lot of is the importance of process. I think that's something we've started talking about with town staff and the study team, is that as opposed to just specifically here's another drawing of a typical section, there needs to be a process for reviewing each street on its own merits, but there being sort of guidance in terms of being able to do that. So if I can circle now back to sort of the planning questions. At this point in time, I'm not aware of any plans to do any official plan amendments to add an additional road category or to do some sort of overlay to recognize these streets differently. Doesn't necessarily, that's one approach of handling. The other approach that many municipalities are doing is coming up with guidelines that would apply different sorts of right. And I think this is sort of in essence where the town has gone with this, is recognize that that a local road's not a local road's not a local road, but they still perform the same function. They just don't all have to look the same. And you can achieve that without having to amend the official plan. So there are opportunities to do that. Whether the town, as a result of the feedback it hears and wants to go through a process of an official plan amendment, that would still be decided. That's not part of the mandate at this point. And if that was the case, this would be a whole lot bigger exercise in terms of how the town would approach it from under the Planning Act. So it would be a different process than what we're taking. So at this point in time, there hasn't been the direction to want to proceed down the road of doing anything more at this point in time than trying to reconcile the engineering challenge. So at the end of this process, our report will, talk about what we've done, present some guidance with regards to how to move forward. How that's going to look, I'm not 100% sure, given all of the feedback that we've received. There'll be some sort of work product at the end of it that will be a report that will have some guidelines, guidance, and some drawings in. So I'm not 100% sure what it's going to look like, just given the sort of the feedback that we've been offered. So in terms of, and if I've missed anything, we can circle back, but I seem to recall those were the key points of your presentation. On the engineering side, in terms of things like different stormwater treatments, et cetera, you are right. It's completely right that there are a whole variety of different techniques for dealing with stormwater outfall. Those typically would be addressed on a project by project basis. We're just sort of looking at sort of generic guidance, and whether part of the generic guidance is when considering an outfall, if it doesn't, if you're looking at having stormwater that, is being untreated, there's probably a necessity to look at things like oil grit separators or storm scepters or other, some cases there may be opportunities for, LID treatments in, bioswales in some locations. I understand that's not going to be in very many, but there may be other treatments that the town could look into for the purposes of stormwater management. And then at that point in time, there would be a much greater engagement of entities like the Conservation Authority and other entities. So as a, because of that, this is not following a Class CA process because there's no specific project that we're tying it to. The specific projects that could emanate from this may be subject to a municipal Class CA, but at this point in time, I wouldn't envision that. So it would be up to the municipality to decide how it wants to engage with the community as part of the process, as well as regulatory agencies and other authorities. And that would be done on a project by project basis. So hopefully I've captured most of what you've asked. And if I haven't, then by all means, let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. You did. I thought there were some helpful comments. Maybe after I finish my last remark, Jamie or the counselor can just answer. I think you mentioned there will be a work product to the town. That's going to be, I guess, to Jamie for her to report to council. You don't have to answer this now because I'm going to just finish my last point. But and then with recommendations to adopt something, and I just want to know what that is. It sounds like it's not a new road classification, and that there will be not an official plan amendment. But I would like to understand from Jamie is that will there be input from Jay and his staff on the planning impacts of recognizing separate and different distinct road design, if not classifications, on the land use planning impacts of the character of the area. And I'm going to end just saying that a local road is not a local road, is not a local road. I completely agree with that. They serve different purposes, and that is clear in walking those streets that you've identified. We see that the people share the road. These local roads here, multimodals, bicycles, people walking to and from the beach or out for strolls, and motor vehicle drivers recognize this. It has a traffic calming impact. It has a planning impact. People treat those roads differently, and their ability to maneuver on those roads is distinct. And by amending that, especially by delineating certain aspects of the road, you're, I would say of all the areas of the town that I'm aware of, except for maybe the High Street, these roads are being used often by like pedestrians and cyclists. And so So the status quo, I think, allows the full paved surface of the road to be used by a lot of different modes, and motorists really do heed to that culture. I think that's very evident in sort of the comments that you've heard, and should be sort of codified in recognizing that the whole genesis of the cottage streets is they need to be treated differently. And so agree with that. Don't agree with the 5 that you've shown, but hope that there's something that can be recognized that would sort of heed to that culture and really enhance the area of the town that people do love. And I know, I'm sure Councilor Grace feels the same way when she walks in, and all the people who are listening on all this today. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you.
So are you going to answer that, Jamie? Just about what that might look like to you and to the town?
Nathan, actually, I think I might have to provide you information through email in regards to your question. There's a lot of information and a lot of missing pieces. Jay is not here right now, so I'd have to touch base with him just to kind of make sure I'm saying things properly as far as the planning process goes and the official plan. If we were to incorporate it into the official plan, that takes on a whole other type of study and correspondence, and I'm not able to answer that at this time.
Fair enough. That's a fair point. I think that if the fait accompli is the report that Jean gets, and it gets stored away in an office that's going to determine the construction of potential capital projects that the town undertakes, then we all need to understand that now, because I'm happy to say, if it's an official plan process, to let that bear out, let the decision makers at city council or town council make the recommendations, us make through statutory public meeting, make submissions, and make our views known. But if I don't know that, then I think that I'm going to implore my friends on the call to take this even more seriously than maybe we had, because if a decision is being made by the production of a report through a decision without a decision-making authority, that is something that I have more of an issue with. However, if it's something that's going to inform a larger project, I think that's something that we all can probably respect and understand, that there's an input to something that we have a secondary thing. So I'm happy to take it offline, but I would appreciate something.
Yeah, because I also want to be able to provide you the drainage master plan, which has been, it's nearing completion. So a lot of your stormwater questions and EAs does align with that drainage plan, and that can help answer some of your concerns and questions regarding the stormwater management stuff too. So and it is all available online. It is on our town website for the drainage master plan. I just thought that I would narrow it down to you, Nathan, to answer your specific questions.
Thank you, Jamie. Very good.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi,
I'm Nancy. Hi, I'm Nancy Kebbel, and we have a cottage on Lake Street between Adelaide and Peel. And we also just quickly want to add to the concerns about Adelaide Street Lake before I ask my actual question, because we drive through it all the time after a rain to get down to Lake Street. So thanks for everybody for raising that. Thanks also for all of you for the presentation tonight. It's been very informative. My question is more around the process of communication of this study. So if we're on Lake Street, and so I understand that is a street that is considered to be a cottage street, how will we know in the future what street improvements might be happening, in what day or what year that's going to be happening? Will we be getting a letter from Saugeen Shores letting us know what's going to be happening? Almost like somebody's building in your area and wants a variance, so here's some information for you, that kind of thing. or do we have to keep checking the website? Because quite frankly, I learned about all of this through a Facebook page that if I hadn't been a part of, I might not have even known this was happening. So I'm looking for an answer to how you are communicating all of this out to the Cottage Street people, particularly three-season cottagers, because November is not a time we're actually there. So to be doing this in November and December seems to be not very helpful for the people who are there with three-season cottages. Thank you.
Can I speak to this, Jean?
Yeah, yes, I was just going to say, Councillor Grace would be the best answer.
Yes, I mean, it's unfortunate the way that the timing rolled out so that it's in the winter. There are a couple of suggestions that I would make. I know that as soon as we had the timing for this, I did send out information with the on the meetings and the consultation opportunities to our residents associations, presidents of both the Southampton Residents Association and the Port Elgin Beachers Association, and they sent those out to their members. But also you can sign up through the town to be alerted, to receive alerts on all kinds of news and notices. In terms of a specific project that might affect your property, Jamie can, or Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in the past, staff have hand-delivered notices to people's cottages, and in some cases have sent emails, if they do have emails of those individuals living in that area. But I think one of the easiest things to do is to sign up for the town to send you news alerts and notices on a variety of different, you could news or road projects or whatever. You can sign up for what you want alerts to. You can even sign up to say, I want to see what the current request for proposals are. Maybe if you give Sarah your email address, she could send you, or we could post something at the end of this about how you go about signing up for those alerts.
Okay, thank you, because I'm not a member of an association, so it is helpful, and wouldn't get a hand-delivered letter after the first week of November. So it would be helpful to have that link. That's great. Thank you, Cheryl.
I'm just checking if I'm next to speak. It
I
appears
believe
so.
you are. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
And sorry, just before you speak, Betsy, just wanted to remind folks we were originally scheduled to go to 6:30. It is 7:30, and happy to answer questions. I don't want to, by any means, sort of cut people off. I just wanted to make people aware, just in case you do have to head out or whatever. We can stay a little while longer, but just noticing that every time there's more people joining the call. So just wanted to make folks aware of that. Sorry, Betsy, go ahead.
Great, thank you. And I will be brief. I just wanted to briefly mention that I appreciate your extending your time and attention to this matter. It's obvious it's very important to people. I also wanted to say that by virtue of this study that Gene and his team have undertaken on behalf of the town is acknowledgement that these streets and laneways are different, they're unique, and they ought to have this special consideration. I just want to say that the higgledy-piggledy nature of the streets and laneways in the Cottage area, as we all know, is a very large part of the charm of this historic district. And while the roads need to be redeveloped from time to time, the streetscape and greenscape also should be preserved and protected. And just a comment that from the mapping that Gene and his team would have been using, it may not physically demonstrate the greenscape that we have in this old area. For example, Peel Street, I noticed, was mentioned as being redeveloped, and I happen to be aware that there's a property where the town's right-of-way ends in the person's kitchen. So the properties are unusual where they're laid. The roads and right-of-ways are unusual, and in the most cases, they're mislaid in this historic old area. And I really would like to see that when roads are redeveloped, that the streetscape and neighborhoods are given due consideration. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
It lays a thank you. Well, and we know.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh, good. I was wondering if I get a chance. Hi, Cheryl. Yes. As Cheryl said at the beginning, this is a special area, and it's shown in the official plan as special area, as a special area. And to be brief, since we've been on a long time, very brief, if this study goes ahead, it will result in significant change to this area. And the study will be used by the city engineering staff to further implement individual projects. There has been no mention of the hedges and the streets, the trees in the area. These roads are, as somebody said, used for walking, riding your bikes, and property access. We don't need a bunch of any curb and gutter or anything like that. The streets are the sidewalk. And as I said, and I believe firmly in this, and it's happened other places in my wide experience, as you know, Cheryl, and I am a member of the Southampton Residents Association on the board of directors. This study will lead to significant change in an important area of Southampton, and is shown in the official plan. If you're going to do anything like this, you should first do policies in the official plan, as we have written into the town before. That's all I'll have to say now, Cheryl. Thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, my microphone is working now. Great. We will now hear from Frank.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Okay, again, echoing thanks that others have expressed for the work that's been done. Just a few observations initially, and then some questions, comments. Adelaide has been mentioned many times tonight. One thing I observed is that Adelaide is actually not a cottage street, according to the study. So I guess a question I would have is, what standards will be applied for any work that gets done on Adelaide? A second thing is it's been mentioned on a number of occasions that there's a sort of a timeline or a schedule for works to take place on different streets. And I'm wondering if the list of all the streets under consideration with the timeframes and the dates or the years of when changes might take place, whether that list will be published online and made available. Now, I want to refer specifically to slide 10 in the presentation, converting rural cross sections to urban. One of the things that struck me with this slide is that it seems to make a jump from that we acknowledge that there are differences in cottage streets that need to be taken into account. And we need to develop new design standards for making changes, but then somehow we leap right to we need to move to urban standards. And when I look at this slide, it seems to be sort of providing some justification for why we would make changes and why there would be curbs and gutters. And each of the things listed here seem to be criteria that would be looked at. And it seems to me, when I look at this, reducing and maintaining speed limits, some of these issues, I'm not sure they actually exist as problems today. And in fact, I think, making these changes may in fact create problems. So, when we talk about reducing and maintaining speed limits, if you think about these cottage streets, the way they're used very heavily by pedestrians and cyclists, whenever there are vehicles on these streets, they're very cognizant of people walking. And I think for those reasons, drive much more carefully. It actually has a calming effect not to have these streets urbanized, in my view. As far as providing pedestrian elements, as has been mentioned, the street is the pedestrian element, and it works very effectively now. And as far as the improving connection to utilities, I'm not sure actually whether this would improve connection to the utilities, whether there are problems with connections to utilities today. Maybe there are. I'm not sure about that. That's a question mark in my mind. And the defining right-of-way and property constraints, that seems to me to be, I guess it's a question, is this where the town is seeking to sort of rectify some issues with rights of way, where we have roads on properties and properties on roads. If that's an objective, then it should be made clear that that's an objective. I won't say much more about the curbs and gutters. I think many people have talked about that already, and the parking. I would echo some of those comments as well. And the delineation of traffic, again, there, I think people that are driving on those roads know where to go. And so I'm not sure of the need to delineate the traffic. In the process, I think you might be creating some other issues. So those are my comments, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I would just maybe in response to a couple of those questions. And we had this question about, if a street doesn't make it on the list, like, is it never going to be considered when the town is reconstructing the road for a different treatment? And that's not the case. Like, based on my conversation with town staff, that wouldn't be the case. The expectation would be that you would look to fit the best cross section to the setting. So it is providing them another tool in the toolbox to have an alternative cross section other than the typical sort of 20-meter right-of-way cross section. So there would potentially be some opportunities that are presented by having additional cross sections for consideration. But it wouldn't necessarily be the first place you would start. Whereas with the cottage streets, you would probably start with the typical cross section for a Cottage Street and work from there. So there still is, obviously that's, each individual project is going to be unique in of itself, but it just does provide an extra tool in the toolbox. And I guess there's been lots of comments about our slide with regards to urbanizing roads, and it is a common topic, hence why we actually included the slide, because we knew it would be an item for discussion. And I would agree with you that not all of those things apply in every circumstance, but they are examples of why you would urbanize under certain circumstances. And it wasn't intended to be that it was a complete checklist of them all. It was, I've seen examples of where you urbanize where you have a drainage problem. And I've seen other examples where you urbanize where you have a parking issue that you want to deal with. So it doesn't necessarily have to be wholly inclusive, but I do agree that it doesn't fit under every circumstance, and each road has to be looked at in and of itself. So I think I would kind of leave it at that, unless there was anything else specifically you wanted me to respond to. And I know that Councillor Grace has her hand up to add in as well.
Thank you, Jean, and thanks, Frank. I was just going to respond to your question about where the 10-year capital forecast is published. It is currently within our budget materials, 2024 business plan that Council deliberated upon on November 22nd and 29th. I cannot tell you off the top of my head what pages that's on, but I know it's within the development department section under their roads. There's a list of the roads in the future capital 2024, and then future capital plans, I think going out to about 2032, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Can I just make one quick, have a quick follow-up regarding this slide 10? I'm wondering if it would be helpful to consider, since this was not meant to be, well, this is perhaps generic in some ways, whether there would be some attempt made on a by Cottage Street basis to go through this kind of assessment to evaluate the extent to which problems, in fact, any of these problems do exist, and then to identify what an appropriate solution would be given the current problems that exist or don't exist on the road, and really to look at, so having a sort of a view of an inventory of where we are today with problems and what potential solutions are on a by street basis.
It's certainly a way to approach it, and I think if the scope of the assignment were different from that perspective, but at this point in time, our charge is to look at sort of this generically, sort of, and how it might apply. But I think one of the things that is becoming apparent is it's going to be more about the process of how the design gets developed going forward, more so than specifically about the characteristics of the cross section, because as you said, each street is unique in of itself, and there may be certain streets the town doesn't reconstruct for 15 years or 10 years, and between now and then things could evolve, change, that would typically, their process would be to consider these locations on a site-by-site basis as they're preparing to proceed with the reconstruction project. So there would still be the opportunity to do that sort of assessment, but it probably would, I'm not gonna say it's more efficient, because it might be more efficient to do them all together at one time, but probably more pragmatic to look at them individually as they come forward for reconstruction, so that it reflects the most current state of the environment when they're planning and designing the project.
Oh, you froze up there. I don't know.
Oh, did
Hello?
you? Hello, are you still there? Am I still there? Better question.
Oh. Hello?
Hello?
Oh, yeah, I think I heard most of that, but
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, I don't know if I froze up, but
yeah.
okay.
But
Well,
you raise an interesting point. When you say you're looking at things generically, but you're acknowledging that each individual street may need to be dealt with, uniquely, specifically at the time. It kind of begs the question why you would be looking at this in a generic way. Anyways, I will leave it at that because I know there may be others in respect for the time. So thank you.
yeah,
Again.
no, thank you. Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. So I think we've come to the end of the list. I do appreciate everyone sticking around to have the opportunity to ask their question. That was and it was very respectful. So I'm appreciative of that. Thank you. So I guess at this point in time, we're going to be continuing forward with our work. Get questions and comments in by December the 22nd. We'll be looking at all the feedback received, and then we'll be charting the way forward. As I mentioned in, I think, my second last slide, we had what we thought was the path forward, but depending on the sort of the feedback that we receive and sort of where things progress from here, we'll be establishing that with further conversation with town staff. So I anticipate that there will be further communication from the town in terms of where this heads next. If it's to progress along the path that we had originally contemplated, then we'll be assembling all of the information, comments received, making any adjustments to the work, preparing our report and submitting it to town staff, who would then be submitting it to town council for their consideration, assuming that everything is appropriate. So I am reluctant to offer up a firm timeline at this point, is simply because we're uncertain of the degree and the extent of the feedback we're going to receive. So, if it takes us longer or there needs to be reconsideration of the path forward, then that could impact the timeline. But, I anticipate the town staff will be communicating further as this matter moves forward. So I don't know, Jamie or Councillor Grace or other members of town staff, if there's anything you want to add before we close out.
I just want to add how thankful I am for everyone that participated and provided their comments and their overall concerns for all of for this study. It was really appreciated, and it will really help staff out in the field working through your reconstruction project or whatever the case may be, just to kind of move forward so that we can hear what your concerns are and move forward. Councillor Grace?
Just thanks to everybody for participating, to our consultants and to staff. I really appreciate all the time you put into this. If anybody would like to, any members of the public watching this would like to contact me personally with any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to at cheryl.grace@saugeenshores.ca.
Great. Well, thank you everyone this evening, and have a good holiday season, and we look forward to hearing further from you on this.